Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for this special webinar, Cartoons and Conservation Using Entertainment for Impact, with Stefan Schumacher. Hosted by the Berkeley Chapter of the Society for Conservation Biology at the University of California, Berkeley. I will be your moderator today. My name is Sarah El-Shafi, and I am a doctoral candidate in the Department of Integrative Biology at the University of California, Berkeley. Before we begin, I'd like to invite our chapter president, Emma Steigerwald, to say a few remarks. Emma, are you with us? Oh, I think she hasn't had a chance to log on yet. Well, I'll just make a few quick remarks. The Berkeley chapter of the Society for Conservation Biology at the University of California, Berkeley holds regular events, both for the community and often that are open to the public. Right now, during the pandemic, of course, all of our events are online, such as this webinar. If you're interested in learning more about the Berkeley chapter's events, you can find us on our website, and you can also find us on Facebook, and we will be putting this recording on YouTube after this webinar. So if you just look up Berkeley Chapter Society for Conservation Biology on YouTube, or if you put in Cartoons and Conservation, you'll be able to find this recording on YouTube that way as well. And you can also find out more about us through that. The Society has some other events upcoming. They are screening a film through Netflix Watch or Netflix Party next week. I believe it's called The Path of the Anaconda. So if you are interested, please do check that out and check our Facebook page for more details. All right, and now it is my genuine pleasure to introduce our special guest speaker, my friend and colleague, Stefan Schumacher. Stefan has been an animator at Pixar Animation Studios in Emeryville, California for the last 10 years. Originally from Switzerland, a landlocked country, he moved to San Francisco 13 years ago to attend art school and now spends most of his free time by the ocean. Stefan's filmography as an animator includes many notable Pixar feature films such as Brave, Inside Out, Coco, Incredibles 2, Toy Story 4, and most recently, Onward. Stefan has also served as animation supervisor on the Pixar Spark short, Wind, and on the independent short film, Sonder. And of course, Stefan is the creator and director of Space Sharks, an independent short film which he completed and released last year. I met Stefan through my work on science storytelling, and we connected over a shared passion for using stories to make science more accessible, a passion that Stefan infused into his new animated short. Stefan is joining us today to share a bit about how he made Space Sharks and to discuss how to make conservation messages both entertaining and memorable. Stefan will also share thoughts on ways that scientists can potentially collaborate with artists to expand the impact of their outreach. We will have plenty of time for Q&A after Stefan's presentation. Please feel free to start entering questions in the chat during his presentation so that I can queue them up. I will then read all questions anonymously during the Q&A. Now, without further ado, I will turn it over to Stefan. Stefan, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Sarah, so much for having me. Thank you all. And Sarah, thanks for organizing everything. It was no small feat. Many emails had to be written to Pixar back and forth to make sure everything was kosher. So I appreciate that very much. And yeah, thank you all for coming. You've no doubt had a bunch of Zoom meetings already today. So it's I feel very privileged that you're here tonight. Cool. So I'm going to share my screen real quick. And then we'll get right into it. Let's see. Sarah, you're able to, let's see. Sorry, let me quickly do one thing. Share. All right. Sorry for the technical difficulties. Sarah, can you give me a quick feedback? Are you able to see this all right?
Yes, it looks good. No
All right,
worries.
great. Thank you. All right, so I'll talk, hopefully you've had a chance by now to see the film. This is what we'll be talking about today a little bit. A little bit about making of, how the film was made, and then just some thoughts on maybe how you might build your own short film. All right, so the idea to make Space Sharks came about 5 years ago when I was browsing on YouTube looking for some conservation related videos, and I came across a video like this, not this particular, but a video like this about the ivory trade. Let me play it real quick.
Our tolerance for natural resources crime, for wildlife crime, is zero. Zero tolerance for wildlife crime.
As global citizens, we all have a shared interest in bringing the brutal, deadly trade in bloody ivory to an end.
And so it was a very well produced, sort of high budget film, very educational, great voiceover, and to my surprise, at the time when I watched this, which was 5 years ago, it only had about 1,000, maybe 2,000 views at most. And the YouTube algorithm simultaneously recommended to me a different video, also animal related, and it was this one right here. Let's see. And so this animal related video, to my surprise, had 1.5 million views. And it made me think that how was it that one video was unable to capture the public attention, but had such an important message? And on the other hand, the silly animated video was very much able to capture people's attention with no content. And so there was born the idea of perhaps, would it be possible to make an animated short film that could capture people's attention and sort of use it to tell a message, right? And so very quickly started kind of thinking about what if one could disguise it as a sort of modern TV cartoon, use those aesthetics to appeal to a wider audience. Started collecting some inspiration from different cartoon shows at the time. And yeah, started getting on with the film, started the process. And so the process of making a short film has been the same, or I should say the process of making an animated film, whether it's a short film or it's a sort of a feature film length, like a Pixar film, the process has been unchanged for a long time. And it's the process of breaking down complexity, but also the process of staying non-committal for as long as possible. Basically trying to stay iterative for as long as possible, because the further you get along in the process, the closer you get to the finished product, the costlier it is to make changes. And so typically the first step would be to do some kind of rough sketches in a sketchbook, start sketching out some ideas, and then very quickly starting writing a script. And the advantage of having a script is that it's words, it's really quick. You can write a script in a couple of days, look at it, iterate on it, get feedback, show it to your friends. And so it's very quick to make changes. And so I did a first pass on a script, and I reached out to my friends to start recording some initial kind of tests and voices. And so the man on the very left, my friend Jeremy, is the voice of the tall shark. And then you have Zach in the middle, he's the voice of the short shark. And then Adrian in the cocoa sweater, he's a coworker from Pixar. He works in audio, and he helped us record some of this, some of the dialogue. And so typically the next step is you'll take the dialogue that you recorded and you'll put it to some really crude animated barely animated drawings, really sketchy drawings, and you just to kind of see how it plays.
Remember, you had a choice. Don't leave me hanging now. Look at this place.
And so the crude drawings is considered is called the storyboard. And again, the idea there is you're just like trying to rough it out really, sketch it out really rough, just so you can iterate quickly. After that starts the process of starting to think a little bit about, okay, so I have the script, I have some sketches and some voices. What are some of my locations look like? So the space sharks, they crash land on Earth. And so they're first in the jungle and starting to kind of trying to get some inspiration for what some other backgrounds look like, what the mood should be like in the backgrounds. Some of the color schemes already are sort of being thought out. And then very quickly, I started making real rough sketches of possible backgrounds based on the previous slide, previous research. And I had the great fortune that I was able to reach out to my contacts in the industry, friends from other studios, and I was able to ask, hey, can you help me work on some of these backgrounds? And so I would typically send out a rough sketch, and they would send me back something, and we would iterate on it, give notes, etc. And so this is what a finished background would look like. This is a background for a moving shot. So this is when characters are moving from left to right in screen, it has to be sort of and it has to be a panning shot. You'll have to kind of draw like a very landscape format background. Static shots, and then all these little seats have to be populated with characters eventually. And then, so this background, for example, just to kind of showcase how even if a background is in the film only for a split second, so when you look at this shot right here, this sequence, Trevor comes in and grabs Gleb's face, and it's just, you can see the background just for a split second, but nevertheless, it has to be, everything has to be done by hand, right? So it's a very tedious, very long kind of process. Next up would be designing some props. So whenever anything moves that has to be interacted with, it would be considered a prop. And you can see here in the sort of background, slightly muted, this was the first pass. Let me see, I have a pointer somewhere. This was the first pass that the artist had sent me, and then I had to do some drawovers because the can needed to be able to open, there needed to be a lid, you need to be able to take something out of it. And so yeah, many props. All the scenes almost had some form of prop, variations of props. Prop for the suit, spacesuit, human suit. Lots of variations on different knives and blood splatter. And then eventually the process of tying down some of the characters, trying to design the characters a little bit more fully. Of note here is perhaps that, so most cartoons that you will see on TV nowadays are kind of done with this technology that is sometimes called 2.5D, which is you have a two-dimensional character and they're rigged up in a way that they have some ability to behave like puppets. And this is kind of a cost-saving measure that you can draw the character once, basically, and very quickly manipulate it and animate it. And you're able to go through footage much quicker this way. So on the right here, you have these substitute drawings where you very quickly, if you have to animate dialogue for a character or the face, or you have to animate the face, you can very quickly select from a library of drawings, and it allows you to go through a lot of work very quickly. On the left, you can see that the puppet exists in about 6 different views. And so while a shot is happening, you can switch between views, quickly switch between views, and maybe animate, move the puppet in a back view, switch it to a side view, move it in a side view. And it accounts for a certain aesthetic. If you have watched any cartoons recently, if you're into that, you'll see that the aesthetics is very similar, and it's largely because of this technology, because it has some limitations of what you can do stylistically. The trade-off being that you can work quicker and that you have this 2.5D workflow. And so, yeah, when it all comes together, backgrounds, the camera moves, all the different characters. This was one of the more complex scenes of the film, just because you have all these little puppets basically that are moving around on screen. All right. So while I was making this film, I was largely just kind of going by feeling, just largely acting intuitively. And it's not until afterwards, sort of in preparation for talking about this and making this talk, that I was able to think about it a little bit more analytically. Think about, what does it take to get a product or an idea, film in this case, to an audience? What does that look like? How might one break that down? And I thought about that I think it's these specific steps are involved. So on the very left, you have a product, a service, an idea. On the very right, you have an audience. And so the steps are that the very first step after the product is that you decide what's the emotional core, what is the emotion I want to cause in the audience, in the customer and the client. So that's like right off the bat, to decide, okay, what is the emotion I want to trigger? And then thirdly, how do I want to package it up? How do I want to wrap this up nicely? Fourth, how do I distribute it? What is my means of distribution? What is my platform? How will I get this to in front of eyeballs? How would I get this to the person? And then lastly, who is it that I'm trying to reach? Who is my audience? And so I think it's useful to look at advertising for this, because they've sort of over the years specialized, distilled down this process of reaching an audience with an emotional message. And it's very interesting to see how they differ. What choices do they make? And so step one, the product here is beer. This is a beer ad that is that I quite often see in my neighborhood. And so that's straightforward. It's a beer. And now the emotional core, the narrative that they're using to target the emotion is perhaps they're trying to target this desire for individualism, for non-conforming, for being sort of rugged, and for doing things with your hand. And so the visuals are giving me sort of that idea. That's, yeah. And then in terms of packaging, they're using very specific imagery, very specific sort of graphics. It's the black and white photography. It's a certain type of lighting, a certain type of person in the ad. And then in terms of distribution, I've seen it on billboards mainly, but I'm sure they have they probably have some sort of internet campaign as well, or magazine ads, I assume. And then the customer is probably somebody in the Bay Area that works mainly on a computer, and to whom this is appealing, to whom this is interesting. This idea of like working with one's hands and back to the roots kind of thing is what I imagine. This is another ad from my neighborhood. I recently drove past this. It's a Bayer ad with their tagline, "This is why we science." And the product here is interesting. seemingly it's just there. So this is just, they're trying to get their name out, brand recognition. So the product is the brand itself. And then what is the emotion they're trying to target? Belonging, family, togetherness, having a good time. When you're healthy, you can do these things. You can be with your family. You can have a great time. You can have fun. How are they packaging it? Once again, this is a billboard, but they're using specific imagery, right? So they're using a photography of these people. They're not using kind of crazy graphics or sort of strange cartoons. It's just very straightforward photography of two people, sort of bland, very simple font. And so, yeah, distribution, they're probably distributing it all over the place. This is just happens to be this billboard. And then who's the customer is a little bit harder to say, but probably, I would say probably somebody more in the age range of this man, which is a more avid user of prescription drugs and wants to make sure that they can be healthy and spend time with their family. So we can infer that from this. By the way, Sarah, feel free at any point to comment or to talk as well. I mean, I'm feeling it's a bit strange. I feel like I'm talking to an empty room. So if anybody wants to comment or
Yeah, I realize it's kind of weird, but no worries. We're all with you. And some people are already sending in questions, actually. So I'm keeping a list of them for afterwards.
That's good. That's good.
Don't worry, I'm laughing at all your jokes.
Okay. All right. So on to the next thing. This is a product that a friend of mine is making in LA, and it's basically it's called the Field Kit, and it's a list of, it's a bunch of sensors in a box, and it's to encourage and empower people to do their own citizen science. So it's a box full of sensors that you can set up. It has a water sensor, temperature, air. It's customizable, and it's sort of a citizen science super box. And so that's the product, is sensors in a box, basically. But then in terms of the narrative or the emotion, they're not just going to say, hey, do you love sensors? Here's a box full of sensors. They're going to choose something that targets the emotion. So they're probably going to say something more along the lines of like, hey, this can empower you to build things for your community. Check your local environment, check your water quality, make choices for your tribe, for your community. They're going to say, hold powerful people accountable when you have your own. You can hold powerful people accountable when you have your own data, when you can do your own science. And in terms of packaging, I thought it was pretty interesting that for their visuals, for their aesthetics, they're choosing sort of a very tech-oriented, maybe some of tech startup, Silicon Valley kind of visuals. They had an illustrator come in and help them with their with their aesthetics, I guess. And so I think it's an interesting choice for a scientific tool, science-based tool, to kind of step with one foot in the tech world, with aesthetically, for sure. And then in terms of distribution, they're a very small company, so they're not going to have any billboards or magazine, take out any magazine ads. So the way they're distributing it, the way they're advertising it, is going to be through social media, through word of mouth, sort of internet-based platforms, perhaps some internet-based publications, if they're lucky. And then their customer is anybody who wants, who's interested in science and who, let me be a bit more specific. The customer is probably citizen scientists, NGOs. I think they're hoping to have customers in countries, countries that don't readily have access to these sort of tools, and to help people, scientists there, allow them to do their work over there. And then for Space Sharks, the product is an information product. It's for perhaps the education of, hey, this is happening to sharks. And yeah, I would say just the education is the product here. The emotional chord I'm trying to reach with it is sort of twofold. On one hand, I'm trying to promote empathy for these animals, show them in like a positive light. And on the other hand, I'm trying to get a little bit of like, what's the word? Outrage is perhaps not too strong a word, but a little bit, yeah, I'm just going to say outrage, for the lack of a better word, of at the end of the film seeing what the reality actually looks like. So, and then in terms of the packaging, my hypothesis is that for this film, that packaging it in a way that looks very much like television cartoons, something you would see any given day, would have a certain impact, would reach a certain audience. Distribution, I mainly uploaded it to YouTube and distributed it online, video platforms, Vimeo, this kind of thing. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And in terms of the customer, I was hoping the same crowds, the same demographic that would watch cartoons would be targeted here. Somebody, at the time I thought this would probably be anybody, men and women from age 15 to perhaps, I don't know, 35. All right. Specifically, what might be some of the advantages of using a short form narrative or short film for the packaging? And I think it's that we're just hardwired to be interested in stories. It's what we're naturally drawn to. It's what we spend a lot of our time occupying our time with. And the formula is typically this. It's character gets in a predicament and tries to get out of it. One example, and so you have a character, he's in a predicament, he overslept, and how does he get out of it? And I like this example very much because he himself got himself into the predicament. And I think that's very true for the great stories, is that we are our own worst enemy. And so it's usually ourselves, it's us who gets us in the predicament in the first place. Here's an example. This is BBC Planet Earth 2, I believe. And we're going to look at storytelling here again. Character, predicament, attempted extrication. So what I like about, I think what's noteworthy about this video is that they're telling the story of an ecosystem, but they're telling it from the perspective of an individual. And I think that's quite true of storytelling, is that storytelling sort of happens on the level of the individual. And it allows us, by doing that, it allows us to kind of connect to the individual and feel sort of empathetic to their fate, right? This is another example. Let's see, right here. It's a little clip from a film called Game Changers about veganism and its effect on the environment. I'm going to play a little bit about it, a little bit of it. Let me see if I can turn up the audio here.
More than 15 years. Then I got injured.
All right, one more try. No.
Then I got injured, unable to teach for at least 6 months. I spent more than 1,000 hours studying science on recovery and nutrition, and stumbled across a study about the Roman gladiators.
The gladiators were predominantly vegetarian.
How could the original professional fighters be so powerful, eating only plants?
When I made the switch to a plant-based diet, I qualified for my 3rd Olympic team. I broke 2 American records. I was like, man, I should have done this a long while ago.
When I went plant-based, I wasn't sure if I was going to survive. And I actually became like a machine.
All right. So what's interesting about this is a documentary, again, sort of wanting to promote the benefits of veganism. And what's interesting for me in this approach is that, again, they're doing storytelling on the level of the individual. So they're singling out these athletes, superstars. One is like an MMA fighter, the other one was a cyclist, the third one is a strongman. And so they're telling the story of the different individuals. And then they're occasionally kind of zooming out and saying, oh, and also, by the way, this is what it does to the planet, and this is what farming does to the environment. And so they're kind of zooming in and out, but they're always coming back to the individual. And in terms of advertising, it's sort of interesting to see that they're using kind of the Nike formula, right? The Nike approach, where they're saying, like, we're trying to sell this idea that veganism is a good thing. And so we're going to show these athletes, and we're going to have people kind of want to be like them and compel people with that narrative. Another advantage of the short form narrative, I think, is that you can very easily distribute it. So theoretically, it's just as easy as uploading it to a video platform. And hypothetically, at least, we can talk a little bit about what that really means in reality, but distribution is seemingly very easy. This is a bit of news I saw a while back. And so this is Yvonne Chouinard, the CEO or founder of Patagonia, talking about how they're using film to elicit emotion because it's the emotion that compels action. And so they're kind of doing more and more conservation messaging through film. One thing, I'm not entirely sure how this fits into the talk, but I wanted to quickly address the packaging as well in terms of the aesthetics. So if you will allow another personal anecdote, perhaps, I don't know, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, if you were into electronics, this is what your world would have looked like, right? This is sort of the aesthetics of electronics and electronic parts. And fast forward 10 years, 2020, 2019, this is what it means to be into electronics. This is what it means to get access to electronics. Let's see if I can. And so I had some mild interest in this field to begin with, but it hadn't been particularly appealing to me to be in this world. This was nothing that was seemed particularly interesting, but suddenly it seems much more accessible. They have beautiful websites that you can easily order parts from. It just looks like a consumer product that's appealing, and it just looks like a different world. It's a world that is inviting and looks easy and non-confusing. And so the reason why I bring that up is, here's an example of the Wildlife Conservation Society, who in 2015 overhauled their entire corporate identity or their look. And I feel that just by changing their logo, I think it's very powerful to sort of, what's it called? yeah, a very powerful way to reach a different type of audience. And back to this real quick. So I think to me, that's the reason why it's exciting to me is that it might be very hard to, write legislation to get a piece of land protected for a conservation cause or to do policy work. That's very complex, very time consuming, but something like changing a logo, I think, is very accessible. It's kind of the low-hanging fruit that people aren't picking as much. And so that's why I wanted to bring it up real quick. I think there's something actionable here with this. And one thing, or one way in which it might be actionable is that there's nowadays, even if you don't want to hire a graphic designer, you can go on a place like Creative Market and you can download templates for your next presentation. You can download sort of template logos to give you an idea of how you might incorporate it in your work. And so I think it's quite accessible, quite actionable. To that, I often have had the experience that when talking to people in the conservation field and talking about animation, they're very interested in telling their story, what they're working on, and telling the story of their telling their story in the form of a short film. And they often ask, "Hey, could you make me a short film of the work I'm doing with wolves, the conservation work I'm doing with wolves in the north of California? Hey, could you tell the story of this waterfowl conservation thing that I'm currently doing, or the pangolins?" And so I thought it might be useful to do a little breakdown of what goes into producing a short film like that. And so I have this list here. It's a sort of a tiered approach from left to right. On the very left, you have like the minimum production value. So how can I make it like the cheapest possible with the fewest people possible? And on the very right would be just the most high budget animated short film with a big group of people, big budget kind of an approach. And so we'll look at the first example. This would be a possibility, something like this.
The vote. We have forgotten this distinction between an intellectual democracy and a democracy by birthright. We have given the vote to all without connecting it to wisdom. And Socrates knew exactly where that would lead, to a system the Greeks feared above all, demagoguery. Ancient Athens had painful experience of demagogues. For example.
So for this first film, I'm calculating that you would perhaps need a team of 3 people, and they would work on it for a week and a half. And it would involve like some scripts, some art direction, some editing, but also stock photography. And you could do it cheaply because you wouldn't pay too much for the stock photography. You don't need a custom illustrator. You just need somebody to move things around and somebody to do a voiceover. The second approach, slightly higher in complexity, would be a mix of live action footage and animated content. So let's look at that.
This is a black sicklebill bird of paradise at dawn in the forests of New Guinea. It's one of 39 birds of paradise, a family of birds known for the male's extraordinary courtship dances and ornate feathers. They've been called the holy grail for wildlife filmmakers, in part because for decades they were really hard to film.
One of the really challenging things about animals is that they do a lot of stuff at dawn, and at dusk, just when the light's going.
The black sicklebill only performs its courtship ritual at the...
So for the second example, you have some stock footage of animals. You have some custom interviews with people. So already you need a film crew. You need somebody to go out there, set up the mics and the lights and film the person. Then you have an illustrator involved who's doing a little bit of custom illustration for the typography, and just the graphic design. So already the complexity becomes quite a bit higher. And so I'm reckoning perhaps, I don't know, slightly double the team size, triple the amount of time. The next tier up from that might be fully custom illustration. Let's see. There you go.
I grew up in Southern California, where I was exposed to severe droughts at an early age. Water is so essential in our daily lives. But there are places where there just isn't the infrastructure. In fact, 844 million people lack easy access to safe drinking water. Access to water should be a right for everyone in the world. As a mechanical engineer, I thought maybe I could help. My lab works with materials known as adsorbents.
All right, so for this type of film, and again, I'm using as a baseline, all these would be a 5-minute short film. For this type of film, the thing here is that you get nothing for free, right? There is no stock images. You can't just quickly go to the person and film them. So everything's custom, everything's handmade. You need somebody to do the visuals first, then you need somebody who animates the visuals. You need a composer because there's probably going to be some custom music to the animation. And so the complexity increases here a bit as well. And then the last tier would be fully hand animated, high sort of complexity, yeah, full animation. Let's see here.
There's a orangutan in my bedroom and I don't know what to do. She plays with all my teddies and keeps borrowing my shoe. She destroys all of my houseplants and she keeps on shouting, ooh. She throws away my chocolate and she howls at my shampoo. There's a orangutan in my bedroom and I don't want her to stay. So I told the naughty orangutan that she had to go away. A orangutan in my bedroom, just before you go, why were you in my bedroom? I really want to know. There's a human in my forest and I don't know what to do. He destroyed all of our trees for your food and your shampoo. There's a human in my forest and I don't know what to do. He took away my mother and I'm scared he'll take me too.
All right. So yeah, this is just shy of feature film quality animation, and it involves a lot of people, a big team size, a lot of time to do the work, a lot of moving parts. So that's sort of the highest level of complexity imaginable. And then this was a sort of back of the envelope calculation I did for what might be a budget that you'd have to consider for each of these films. And again, sort of based on like a 5-minute, based on like a 5-minute long short film. And Sarah was kind enough to put me in contact with a friend of hers that works at Weber Shandwick, which is a very big PR firm in Chicago, I believe. And I was asking him if he thought that these numbers seemed accurate, and he seemed to say that that's more or less what it would cost in his experience as well. He does this work for clients, big clients, very often, and so he seemed to be in agreement that this is more or less the budget that they would allocate. Yeah, and so it gives you a bit of an idea of what might be involved to tell a conservation message, to tell your work in this short form narrative. In terms of the distribution, this is the stats for Space Sharks. So I uploaded it to YouTube and Vimeo and a few other websites. And so by far, YouTube was the most popular, was where people saw it the most, right? It's on a few different channels on YouTube, my own channel, a few other channels. And I think currently it's at a combined view of about 103,000 on YouTube. And then Vimeo, it did well on Vimeo. It got some like short of the month award and a little bit of press, but not that many people saw it on Vimeo. So a total of 13,000 people there. A mix of people saw it on other websites, and then festivals. I did submit it to some festivals, but just by physical limitation, not a whole lot of people will see it in festivals, even if you put it out in a whole lot of festivals. So I didn't put a whole lot of effort into the festival distribution. This is interesting to see. This YouTube statistics for the first 30 odd days of being on YouTube. Not a whole lot of people saw it. And then during that time, so the first 30 days, I'm sort of writing out, I'm contacting online platforms, online magazines, animation specific publishers online saying like, hey, I made this short film. Do you want to publish it on your website? Uploaded it to a whole different bunch of different places. Eventually uploaded it to Reddit, where it got picked up by somebody else. This website called Fino Filipino, and that's sort of the first time people were actually seeing it. Let's see here. So that's the first spike right here, and it slowed down a bit, and slowed down, increased a bit, and then got another bigger spike when it was picked up by somebody who had randomly seen it on YouTube. This is a UPDT, was a Spanish channel on YouTube that saw it, posted it on their channel, and from there, that's sort of where it got the highest amount of views. And then suddenly, around day 70, it just flatlined. And I'm not quite sure what accounts for this, something in the algorithm, but it's been pretty flat since. These are supposedly if you're planning to get into the YouTube game and you want to be a YouTube influencer, these are the 3 holy grail measures: comments to views, likes to views, and views to subscribers. And what is apparently considered a good measure, sort of on a good cat video, is if you have 0.5 comments to views, which means for every 1,000 views, you get 1 comment. That's considered A-okay, that's good. That's user engagement, people are liking it. Likes to views 4%, and then how it compares to Space Sharks. And then I didn't have any subscribers at the time, so there was no sort of views to subscribers ratio to be had. And then this is interesting. So apparently, first of all, let's see here. The country where Space Sharks was seen most on YouTube was by far United States, followed by Spain. That's that Spanish channel that I mentioned, Spanish-speaking channel, Spain and Mexico. It was overwhelmingly seen by young men, sort of men in the age range of 18 to 24. And that caught me a bit by surprise in terms of thinking about the capturing attention. If you wanted to promote, I don't know, STEM science to young girls, you probably wouldn't choose this particular packaging to get that message across, right? I hadn't really considered what demographic might I be targeting with this, with uploading it to YouTube only, and with doing this kind of packaging. And yeah, that's something to think about. And then we're almost at the end. This is what I'm working on next, is working with a friend of mine. She's a scientist in Sri Lanka, and her and I are working on a children's book promoting the conservation of blue whales in Sri Lanka. But yeah, that's it for me. I'm going to stop sharing right now.
Thank you so much, Stefan. That was great. Even seeing this presentation the second time, I still learned a lot. All right. So now we're going to move into the Q&A portion of the webinar. And I'd like to start off with a question that I've been thinking about a lot. So I've encountered many scientists who are wary of using storytelling in their communications because they don't want to be manipulative. On the other hand, the documentary filmmaker Ken Burns actually encourages storytellers to be manipulative, arguing that you must do so in order to have an emotional impact on your audience. So I'm curious to know what you think about this, Stefan. Is it possible to tell a story without being manipulative, or is manipulation a necessary part of storytelling?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's, so what comes to mind is I work in feature films, sort of, kind of Hollywood-esque, and you wouldn't ask, it's interesting that you wouldn't ask, that question wouldn't come up for a feature film, right? You wouldn't sort of worry about Transformers manipulating your emotions. So it's very specific to films of which we expect to be told the truth or some form of truth, perhaps. And so, yeah, I think I lean towards that it's okay to kind of use narrative to tell a compelling story to get more people to see it. So I'm more with Ken Burns in the Ken Burns department there. But I understand the other side as well, because we're so vulnerable, right? We're so, we sort of rely on people to do some of the sense making for us, because we can't just compute everything all the time that's happening around us. So we rely on other people to do sense making for us. And in that, we're vulnerable to be, what's the word? Deceived. And certainly we know what using narrative for the wrong reasons can do. Very quickly get into sort of propaganda territory. I think it's a timely question as well because of how the sentiment towards the news has been changing, I think. And so, yeah, I think we're vulnerable, and so we're wondering, should you be? Are you deceiving me with this or not? I mean, Ken Burns' example, I think what comes to mind is that it perhaps comes down to trust, right? Do we trust Ken Burns to tell us a story that is not manipulative, but that's using narrative just for the effect of reaching more people? And so it's thinking about, like, yeah, how much do we trust the source? And then also, how much responsibility do we take as the audience to verify that what we're seeing has the right amount of truth, or what we're seeing has is good information, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question, and there isn't an easy answer, but I agree with you that, if you want people to have an emotional reaction to the story, to some, like, you have to influence your audience emotionally to some extent. And you could call that being manipulative. You could simply call it being an effective communicator, but then it's like, in your cartoon, Space Sharks, your position on shark finning is very, very clear. It's presented in a very negative light in the story, but it's still for the audience to decide what they think about it after they view it. Another question. So I've spoken with many students who are interested in both science and art and want to draw on both interests to do science communication. So what advice would you like to offer to students who are trying to cultivate both interests and skill sets in order to do this kind of work?
Yeah, I think that's really, really important. I think that having some knowledge and foundation in the arts can be really, really powerful in communicating your message, right? In presenting your work, in engaging your audience. And as I mentioned, like, having a certain aesthetics, depending on your aesthetics, you'll reach more or less people. A scientific paper is going to reach a certain audience, perhaps a small, highly specialized audience, if it's just a paper. If you can package it in a nice way and add your aesthetics to it, I think it has the chance to reach a much wider audience. And so I would probably say to, foster those two things as much as possible. They're mutually inclusive.
I totally agree. We have quite a few questions from the artist, from the audience for our artist. One of the questions was, how do you find the background artists or the artists that that you collaborated with really on any aspect of the short film, but especially the artists who did all of those background sets for you? And what are some strategies for initiating that kind of collaboration?
Yeah, it's a great question. This question about working with, I guess, volunteers, right? I think if you're wanting to work with volunteers, you very quickly run into two problems, which is, first, where do I find volunteers? If I'm not paying them, I can't just look them up in like online or Yellow Pages. So that's the first problem. Where do I find volunteers? And then the second problem is, beyond the initial enthusiasm that I might or might not be able to create, what incentive do I offer to the volunteer? How good of an incentive do I have to attract volunteers? And so for those two things, in this particular case for Space Sharks, I was lucky that I was doing this project in a field that I'm already working in. So it was mainly LinkedIn and social media, putting out a call for artists saying, hey, I'm doing this project, this is what it's about, who wants to help? And so I know where to find them. I already have access to them, right? And some people are contacts in my phone, some people are just people in my LinkedIn.
That's an interesting idea. So do you think that for anybody out there who might not already have contacts in the animation industry, if they are looking for people to collaborate with on a project, whether it's looking for a student who's trying to build up their portfolio or looking for professional artists, looking for paid work, do you think that social media is a good place to find those people if you just put out an open call?
Possibly, yeah, it depends on how many people are following you. It can be very effective or it can be not effective at all, right? So potentially, yes. I did, in terms of the LinkedIn thing, I did also message some people that were not in my immediate, what's it called, network. So for example, I had, for Space Sharks, there were quite a few scenes where they had to be, these 2D effects had to be drawn. So for example, when the fin drops in the soup, there's like a little splash and there's smoke coming out. And that's a highly specialized work. And so I didn't know anybody who does that. There was nobody in my field. And so I just looked up 2D effects artists and I just cold emailed people. So that's certainly available to scientists if they don't have anybody particularly in their that they're thinking of, to just look up, hey, I think I need this type of artist. I'm just going to cold email some people and see if they might be interested.
And how might they find those people?
It just, in this case, was just LinkedIn, looking up by job, looking them up by job. And very likely, if you have a few people in your LinkedIn, it's likely that somebody knows a graphic designer somewhere, and you can say, hey, we're both friends with Rita. Why don't you help me out on my project? And I will say that everybody I've talked to, all my artist connections, people at work, there seems to be a big interest in wanting to help out. There seems to be a big interest from artists to want to contribute, to want to help to this cause or that cause. And so I'm not entirely sure, but I would think that if you just cold email some artists, I think you'd probably get some interest, or somebody could connect you to someone else.
That's great advice. I think I am definitely a big proponent of scientists collaborating with artists. And but I'm also a big proponent of artists, of course, getting paid for their work whenever possible. So I think if you're a scientist and you're looking for artists to collaborate with, it's going to depend on what the project is and what kind of budget you have for it. I would say for any scientists attending today who are interested in pursuing this kind of collaboration, I really encourage you to think about including a budget for this type of outreach product in your grant proposals. And Stefan, thanks for those back of the envelope calculations, even just as a first approximation of what kind of budget might be involved. When you first ran those figures by me earlier, as a graduate student, initially I had some sticker shock, like, oh gosh, where am I going to get $50,000 to do an animated short? And yeah, I might not have that kind of grant money right now, just while I'm finishing my dissertation, but I can see, in the future, if I was working with a nonprofit, like a larger nonprofit, or even for a company, that kind of money is very, very feasible, especially if it's, part of like an outreach campaign, or launching a new program or something like that. And even at the low end, with a very like kind of rudimentary type of production, without high-end animation, 5,400, that's very manageable actually for a lot of grants, especially like National Science Foundation grants or philanthropic grants. So I think that those figures are really, really helpful to have as a reference.
Cool. Yeah, I agree. One quick thing, I agree about the payment. Certainly, that's the easiest on everybody, right? If there's payment involved, you suddenly know where to look people up, because you were hiring a company. So that problem's out of the way, and you have the incentive problem is out of the way, and everybody's happy. One thing, if you can't get grants, and if that's not an option, the payment, one thing that could be helpful that comes to mind is that you could still write a sort of a pro bono contract, where you very clearly delineate what is the working relationship, what are the deadlines, what are the parameters of doing this pro bono work, just because part of the frustration with doing a project like this where you're working with volunteers is that it can drag on forever, and then the initial enthusiasm just sort of tanks, and then suddenly people are not reachable anymore. And so I think having a piece of paper psychologically is helpful to both parties, and also it forces the person contracting or hiring a volunteer, it forces the person to very clearly make a plan, make a sort of a plan of attack. What do I want to do? How do I want to do it? How much time do I want to spend on it? And that's very helpful as well, I think.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And another thought just occurred to me: if you're looking for students to work with, there, in addition to providing at least some kind of honorarium, there are a lot of benefits that you can maybe provide to that student that would help them with their professional development. Like, for example, I ran a symposium on science through narrative a couple years ago, and the symposium was taking place at a biology conference with both scientists and artists speaking. And we wanted to have a really nice logo to help advertise the symposium. So I actually worked with a student in scientific illustration at the CSU Monterey Bay program. And in exchange for a small honorarium, as well as registration to the conference so that she could attend the symposium, as well as lodging costs covered for her to attend the symposium, she designed a beautiful logo for us. She was in graphic design and also does some animation. And so attending the conference was a great opportunity for her because her work was on display in the symposium, and she was actually able to find a lot of clients amongst all the other scientific institutions represented at the conference. So there are lots of different ways to set up these kinds of collaborations. Great. So another question we had from an audience member, someone asked, what program were you using that enabled you to move the characters' bodies? So what was the animation program that you were demonstrating?
Yeah, it's a program called Toon Boom Harmony.
Toon Boom Harmony.
Toon Boom Harmony. And it's basically the industry standard. It's for this type of animation. When it's for TV, it has to be done really quick, right? So if it's a short film, not necessarily, but if it's usually for TV, it has to be done quick and on a low budget and no time. And so they're using this particular program very often. And it was a conscious choice to do that so that we could emulate the aesthetics.
Great. Yeah, I just found it online. So I just put the website toonboomharmony.com or toonboom.com/product/harmony in the chat window. I know that a lot of amateur animators and even professional animators also use Blender, which is another free open source animation program. And there are a lot of tutorials online for using Blender. Great. Another question we had: how much would it cost to hire an artist to design and create a digital set? So this kind of goes back to what we were just discussing, but I guess someone was specifically asking if you wanted someone to design the background piece or a set for you, how much would that cost?
Visual set.
Like the restaurant in the film.
Oh, just maybe just the one sort of background. I'm
Yeah.
not entirely sure if that's what the person is asking, but sort of to do just one background would be probably 3 or 4 days of work for an illustrator. And so whatever their hourly base salary would be, so I don't know, probably under $1,000 for one thing. But I'm not sure if that's to the extent. Once computers get involved, if there's a 3-dimensional background that has to be made, that sort of skyrockets the complexity and time that it takes to do that. But for a simple illustration background, just a couple of days, a couple $100, I would assume.
Great. Another person asked, how would you approach budgeting for this type of product? And I think that was before you got into the back of the envelope calculations. So I think we've covered a lot of that, but I wonder if maybe you could break down those figures that you gave us a little bit. So based on the answer you just offered, it sounds like those estimations were based on how many hours and how many team members or crew members you would need, and what their hourly rates might be.
That's going to be the most expensive. So for Space Sharks, for example, we did all the logistic things were done with free tools, Google Drive and Google Sheets. There's lots of free sort of collaboration tools, free versions of Slack and Trello and whatnot. So we were using lots and lots of free tools, so there was no cost there for the logistics of it. So other than paying people's salary, it would be if you need to sort of rent a place to do it, right? And the same thing for Space Sharks. We were just all sitting at home at our computer, so there's no extra cost incurred there. The only extra cost was the software, the Toon Boom Harmony, which is expensive-ish. And that was really it. And one thing I want to mention, which I'm not quite sure answers the question, but as soon as there's music involved that you have to license, things get like exponentially more complicated. So I think some of the most energy I've spent on the film was that at the very end I have a Spanish band, the song of a Spanish band that I really wanted in the film. And to license that was not all that expensive, but just time-consuming emails back and forth. Eventually I hired what is it called? Like a digital rights management firm that specifically does these things, and they reached out to the right people, to the right producers, and so that adds cost and complexity. So if you can work with some royalty-free music, I would recommend that.
Great. Another person asked, someone commented, you've created a wonderful short film. Someone asked specifically if you worked with David McGuire from Shark Stewards at any point, as he's been very active politically to limit overfishing of sharks and instituting shark fin ban trades or trade bans.
Yeah, that's actually I met David years and years ago at the Ocean Film Festival in San Francisco, and he's been to Pixar once or twice as well. And so yeah, I was in contact with him a little bit during the film, and I sent him sort of a few rough passes just to get his thoughts. And even on YouTube, I even have a link to his organization saying, hey, if you want to help sharks, check out this information.
Oh, very cool. So this same person also asked, how do you handle requests from nonprofits to show your film or use it in their advocacy?
So I haven't had all too many requests. I would be open for anybody and anyone to share it. In this particular case, I know certain filmmakers are protective of their films. I have friends that have done short films who are very protective of them, very selective of where they screen it and how they screen it. In this particular case of Space Sharks, I just wanted as many people as possible to see it. I didn't care for any compensation or anything, so yeah, I'd be open to requests.
Well, we certainly appreciate your generosity in that regard. Another question, how did you decide the age of the audience you were going to target with this film? You kind of addressed this in the beginning of your presentation, but this person also asked more specifically, do you think that attempting to reach all ages with your message can also be successful, or do you recommend always working with a specific age target audience in mind?
It's a really good question, and I would reference your friend Frank here, Sarah, from Weber Shadwick, who was talking to me a little bit about that, which is that he mentioned that a lot of the work that they do with clients is convincing clients that they can't make a film that's for all audiences. So typically a client will come in and will say, we want everybody to like this and everybody to see this. And the answer is, if it's for everybody, it's at the same time sort of for nobody at once. And you risk missing your target. And the example he gave was that they made a short film for a pharma company. And the pharma company wanted to specifically hire just fresh out of college students of a certain demographic, and they hyper-targeted to this particular demographic. What is that, 18 to 25 or whatever. And so I would say that it's very difficult to make a film that, or to make a product, or to make a film that will sort of hit all demographics equally. And you're better served and more focused if you can narrow it a little bit.
Well, I would certainly agree with that, especially if you're just starting up. But I also have to ask, since you are an animator at Pixar Animation Studios, which is kind of famous for being the studio that somehow figured out how to make movies that everybody likes.
Yeah.
But would you say that Pixar is successful in that regard because they actually target a specific demographic and they happen to capture a lot of other audiences as well in doing that?
I knew that as I'm talking that might work against me. The truth is I'm not entirely sure. I think part of it is that it's a different medium. It's a long form, it's a 90-minute film. And that has some other possibilities than if you're doing a short film or if you're doing an advertising, right? That's a different universe. But in my time at Pixar, I've never heard them talk about specifically, oh, we're trying to target this or that. They talk about doing a film that the whole family can see, but how they do it successfully is a bit of a mystery, yeah. Honestly.
Well, I guess having a whole studio with over 20 years of experience and a whole, team of story artists behind you really helps in that regard. So
Yes.
If you're working with a smaller crew and you're just starting out and you're just trying to make a short film, maybe narrowing down your target audience would be helpful, at least when you're getting started. Great. So another question, and we'll take a couple more questions here. Someone asked, what notable comments have you received on your YouTube video? Particularly, have you received any strange or weird or otherwise unexpected comments?
I think what was unexpected was that many people reacted positively, which is not something I'm used to from the internet, period. And when I checked last, this was a while back, but out of all the comments, there was just one that was just saying like, oh, man, I really feel like some shark fin soup right now. But that was it. Nobody, there wasn't any trolling. And so certainly that was unexpected. There was lots of positive comments, lots of people saying, oh, I had no idea that this was going on, which that was the hope, right? It was for people to say, oh my God, is that really true? Is that really what's going on? And so I was happy that there was quite a few comments in that realm as well.
That's really interesting. Well, I'm glad it was so well received. And yeah, that one random comment, I guess that just proves my point that even if you make a video that's clearly against something, it's still up for the audience to decide how they feel about it. Wonderful. Well, I'd like to wrap up with one final question. If you could recommend one thing for all scientists who want to become better communicators to do after this webinar, what would it be?
One thing, I would say, to the point that storytelling happens on the level of the individual. I would say, if you're telling a story, if you're putting something out, or if you're presenting something, have a look at it and ask yourself, at which level am I telling the story? Am I telling it really sort of top tier, bird's eye view, or is there opportunity for me to tell the story closer to an individual? And the individual might be somebody that works with you. It might be the species, an individual in the species that you work with. It might be talking about your own story. But to just look at what you're presenting and ask, is there a way to get it closer to the sort of an individual level?
Great advice. Great advice. Thank you so much, Stefan. This was so enjoyable and very, very illuminating and informative and entertaining as well. And I hope everybody watching learned a lot. Again, this was hosted by the Berkeley chapter of the Society for Conservation Biology. And I just put the website for the chapter in the chat. So if you check out the website, you can find out about other events upcoming, including a screening that we have next week. Our chapter president is online now. Emma, would you like to say a few remarks before we close?
Sure. Thanks so much, Sarah. And thank you very much, Stefan. That was a wonderful and very informative presentation for all of us, hoping to do more effective communication of our science. Our screening that's coming up will be on the 29th of October. I'm dropping a link for the RSVP form here, and it's of a film called El Sendero de la Anaconda, which is about the Colombian Amazon and basically the changing landscape of conservation, particularly in reference to self-determination of indigenous groups in the Amazon and how that relates to what's going on in conservation of lands there. And so if you're interested in this event, please RSVP to the film. You will need Netflix, unfortunately, to be able to participate. And I'll just give you a short little quote here to give you an idea of some of the content of the film from the anthropologist that's followed during this film, Martine von Hildebrand. By recognizing indigenous land titles, we also inherently recognize every other aspect of their culture, from the importance of an oral tradition to the power of negotiation. These associations of traditional indigenous authorities determine every aspect of a community's existence and break with paradigms rooted in paternalistic thinking. If we are going to protect endangered environments, we need to treat our indigenous brothers and sisters as equals. Cooperation comes from negotiation, not imposition. Okay. You can always drop your email as well in the chat if you're interested in getting in the Society for Conservation Biology Berkeley's chapter's email listserv, and you're not yet represented there. Thanks, Sarah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Emma. So thank you everyone for joining us tonight. And thank you for all of your great questions and comments. And again, thank you so much, Stefan, for joining us, for generously sharing your amazing short film with us and for sharing your creative talents with us, and for all of your advice. We so appreciate it.
Thanks for everything, everybody. And thanks for your comments and questions. This was great. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much. Stay safe, everyone. Take care.